England or most of the UK, it's very likely that your primary experience with the king is via television. Either in those big set-piece moments like the Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year, or when he appears on your screen to mark some other national occasion. But why do we still have a king? What does he actually do? And how much influence does he really have? I'm the host, and this is a series exploring the role of the monarchy in modern Britain. I want to start this series by looking at what the king actually does, because obviously if we're going to spend any time discussing the monarchy, we need to get over the fact that they're not real. Now, I don't mean they're fake. They're very real in lots of ways. It's just that their powers are extremely limited. So we need to understand what they do. Now, the way I kind of think about it is that the king is both an employee and a figurehead of the state. He attends meetings with the prime minister, delivers major speeches on state occasions, and so on. And for all of these things, he's given money from the government. In 2022, for example, the sovereign grant, which is the amount of money given to the king to allow him to perform his duties, was £86 million. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that nearly half of that was spent on staff costs, which, you know, is kind of par for the course. The royal family is, after all, a pretty large business. The king is also, of course, he has a huge symbolic role in representing the nation at home and abroad. Obviously, he's an important part of our history, our traditions, our culture. I would argue that he's also an important part of our national identity, and crucially, because he's there on every coin and banknote and stamp and passport. He's a constant in a world that's changing all the time. But while he may be the face of England, the reality is that he doesn't hold any real political power. The only thing that he really directly controls is the House of Windsor, which is to say he controls who gets to be a working royal and who doesn't. For example, Harry and Meghan aren't working royals anymore, and Princess Andrew is no longer a working royal. Although that's more about the scandals they've been involved in than anything else. Beyond that, the king's direct control over actual people ends at Prince William. Other than that, he can't tell anyone what to do. All he can do is provide leadership in a more general sense. That is to say, he sets the tone and he tries to guide the country without ever crossing the line into politics. And he has a few different mechanisms for doing that. The first is simply by being present, performing his duties, and meeting people. People often describe the king as the nation's figurehead, its symbolic leader. And that's what this role involves, leading by example and setting the tone. Of course, the king is very careful about what he says and does, which is why he doesn't tend to appear much in public. When he does, though, it's a big deal. For example, last year, the king appeared on the balcony at Buckingham Palace during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations. And while it was a pretty short appearance, it had huge significance. It marked the passing of the baton between Elizabeth II and Charles. It showed the new monarch alongside the old one, and it gave us a sense of continuity amid a sea of change. In other words, it said, look, everything is the same, but it's also different. The guard is changing, but it will still be a smooth transition. And by appearing on the balcony, the king was communicating directly with his people. That's a level of connection that politicians simply don't have. Another aspect of the king's role is receiving foreign leaders and hosting state visits. This is something that the Queen did literally hundreds of times during her reign. And it's a crucial diplomatic function. When foreign leaders come to England, they don't meet the Prime Minister first. They meet the king. It's the highest level of hospitality that we can offer. And it is designed to show that the values that we share with other countries are more important than our differences. It's similar with state funerals. Attending a foreign leader's funeral is another important diplomatic function. It shows respect and solidarity with other countries, but it also binds together the people who are grieving. The sight of the king walking behind the coffin during the Queen's funeral, for example, was incredibly moving. It symbolized not just the end of an era for England, but the passing of a global icon. There are also the less grand but equally important functions that the king performs. For example, he opens Parliament every year, which is a huge ceremonial occasion. But it's also a reminder that the government is there to serve the people, that it's accountable to a higher power. Equally, the king is there to remind us of what unites us, not what divides us. Some people might see that as the role of the Church of England, which the king is the head of, but actually, the king's role is far broader than that. For example, he has representatives in every faith community across the UK, and His Majesty's Lord-in-Waiting, who are members of the House of Lords, attend services in different faiths across the UK. Now, this is clearly a good thing. National unity is important, but some might ask whether having a king is the best way to achieve it. After all, the United Kingdom is made up of people from many different backgrounds, not just Christian people. And the idea that the head of state should come from one particular denomination seems outdated in a modern, diverse society. Well, maybe it is. But the king doesn't just unite us within the country. He also plays an important role in uniting us with other countries. The king's role is to be a force for good in the world. He meets people who are doing good things and supports charities that are making a positive difference. It's about encouraging the best aspects of human nature, showing compassion, empathy, generosity, and kindness. And again, that's a role model for us all. Now, some might point out that you could just as easily model these values without having a king, and they'd have a point. But the king is also a figure of fun, a national treasure. Last year, he appeared dancing at a charity event for the BBC. He's regularly pictured with animals, particularly dogs, and he's known for his love of horses, of racing, and of the countryside. This is, I suppose, the softer side of royalty. But it's an important part of the job nonetheless. The king is very keen to keep the monarchy relevant, to make sure that it continues to serve the nation well. Now, he can't do that on his own, of course. He relies on other people, particularly his family, but also the support of the public. And that brings me on to the final way in which the king exerts his soft power, which is by appealing to our emotions. Now, I'm not talking about sentimentality or nostalgia here, but simply the fact that the king elicits an emotional response. We feel something when we hear his name. We feel something when we see his face, and that inspires confidence and trust. Ultimately, though, the king isn't a politician, and nor should he be. His role is to guide and lead in a nonpartisan way. If he was partisan, he wouldn't be fit for the role. After all, he meets with everyone in the government, including the opposition. He doesn't take sides. He doesn't express personal opinions, and he never interferes in party politics. That's not to say that the king doesn't engage with politics. The king has regular meetings with the prime minister, and he formally appoints the prime minister after an election. He also dissolves parliament before an election, and he formally approves all legislation that passes through parliament. In other words, the king ensures that the government is doing its job properly. And if it's not, then he can encourage them to do better. For example, in 2019, the then Prime Minister Theresa May asked the king to suspend Parliament in order to force a no-deal Brexit. The king refused. Was this a political decision? Well, yes, it was, but it wasn't partisan. The king was upholding the principles of democracy and making sure that the government was acting in accordance with the spirit of the Constitution. That's what the king is there for. So that's what the king does. In the next episode, I'll be looking at whether we should have a king. So if you have any thoughts about the role of the monarchy, what they do well, what they do less well, or indeed whether we should get rid of them altogether, please let me know in the comments below.